the streets as Carol Williams locked her apartment door. The rhythm of the city was just beginning to pulse. Garbage trucks making their rounds, bakers preparing the day's first loaves, and essential workers like Carol starting their commutes. Security footage from the building's lobby shows Carol checking her watch, adjusting her purse, and stepping out into the cool autumn air. Her white nurse's shoes click against the pavement as she walks toward the subway station 3 blocks away. She pulls her jacket tighter around her shoulders against the October chill. At 5:47 a.m., a convenience store camera captures her buying a coffee. The clerk would later tell detectives she was a regular, always polite, always in a hurry, always alive. At 5:52 a.m., she is seen entering the subway station, and then nothing. Carol Williams vanished into thin air. For 30 years that moment, a dedicated nurse walking into a Queens subway station, was the last confirmed sighting of a woman who had spent her life caring for others. No body, no crime scene, no explanation until now. What investigators discovered 3 decades later would shock even the most hardened detectives. The evidence was there all along, hidden in plain sight. And the person responsible wasn't some shadowy stranger, but someone Carol saw almost every day. Someone she trusted, someone who had been watching her. Hey there, True Crime family. Today, we're diving into one of the most baffling cold cases in New York City history. A disappearance that haunted investigators for generations and a resolution that has sent shock waves through an entire community. This isn't just another missing person story. This is about a predator who hid behind a mask of respectability for decades. A man who used his position to stalk and terrorize women while the neighborhood welcomed him with open arms. If you think you know where this story is going, I promise you don't. Before we continue, take a second to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Our channel brings you meticulously researched true crime cases twice a week, and I don't want you to miss a single one. Plus, subscribing helps us continue bringing these stories to light. Stories that deserve to be told, victims who deserve to be remembered. Now, grab your coffee, settle in, and prepare yourself for the stunning details of how a landlord named Harold Brennan managed to hide his dark obsessions for 30 years, and how a single detective's determination finally brought justice for Carol Williams. The story of Carol's disappearance begins like many work days for the 28-year-old nurse. She had moved to Queens from upstate New York just 2 years earlier, landing a coveted position at Presbyterian Hospital. Friends described her as dedicated, compassionate, and meticulous qualities that made her an exceptional nurse and ironically would later help detectives piece together her final hours. What makes this case particularly disturbing isn't just what happened to Carol, but how close the perpetrator remained to the investigation. While detectives searched for clues and family members posted flyers, Harold Brennan, the building's landlord, offered to help organize search parties. He consoled Carol's distraught sister. He even appeared on local news, expressing concern for his model tenant, all while knowing exactly what had happened to her. Tonight, we're going to walk through how this case went cold, the technological advancements that revived it, and the series of small mistakes that eventually brought down a predator who thought he had committed the perfect crime. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop your location in the comments below. Some of our viewers have found connections to cold cases in their own communities through these discussions, and your insight might help shed light on similar unsolved mysteries. Now, let us rewind to 1993 and reconstruct the life of Carol Williams before she became the subject of New York's most puzzling disappearance. Carol Williams wasn't just another statistic. Before her name became synonymous with one of New York's most perplexing cold cases, she was a daughter, a sister, a friend, and a healer. Born and raised in Buffalo, Carol had always been drawn to helping others. Her mother, a receptionist at a local clinic, often brought young Carol to work during school holidays. While other kids might have been bored by the sterile environment, Carol was fascinated. By age 8, she was diagnosing her stuffed animals and bandaging imaginary wounds on her dolls. She knew she wanted to be a nurse before she even understood what the job really entailed. Her older brother, Michael, told reporters years later it wasn't a career choice for Carol, it was a calling. After graduating with honors from SUNY Buffalo's nursing program in 1991, Carol set her sights on the big city. New York in the early 90s was a different place than it is today. The crack epidemic was still ravaging neighborhoods. Violent crime rates were near their peak, and the AIDS crisis was in full swing. But these challenges didn't deter Carol, they motivated her. She landed a position at Presbyterian Hospital in Manhattan, working primarily with HIV/AIDS patients at a time when stigma around the disease remained high. Colleagues remember her as someone who treated every patient with dignity regardless of their condition or background. She was old school, said Dr. Marcus Reynolds, who worked with Carol not in her medical knowledge. She was always up on the latest research, but in her belief that compassion was just as important as competence. Carol lived modestly in a one-bedroom apartment in Queens, specifically in Astoria, which was just beginning its transformation from a working-class neighborhood to the diverse community it is today. She'd found the place through a newspaper listing and considered herself lucky. The rent was reasonable, the commute manageable, and the landlord seemed attentive. That landlord was Harold Brennan. In retrospect, the warning signs were there, but they were subtle. Brennan performed maintenance in Carol's apartment more frequently than for other tenants. He often commented on changes to her appearance. Sometimes Carol would mention to friends that she felt like she was being watched in the building, but she brushed it off as big city paranoia. October 14, 1993 started like any other Thursday for Carol. Her alarm went off at 5:15 a.m. for her 7 a.m. shift. According to her meticulous planner found later in her apartment, she had scheduled a haircut after work and planned to call her mother that evening. The timeline of her disappearance, pieced together from security footage and witness statements, was painfully ordinary until it wasn't. 5:43 a.m. Carol exits her apartment building. 5:47 a.m. purchases coffee at the corner bodega. 5:52 a.m. enters the subway station at 30th Avenue. 5:55 a.m. A subway worker recalls seeing a woman matching Carol's description waiting on the platform. After that, nothing. When Carol didn't show up for her shift, her supervisor initially assumed she was sick. By evening, when calls to her apartment went unanswered, a coworker contacted her family. By the next morning, her brother Michael had driven from Buffalo and filed a missing persons report. The initial investigation moved quickly. NYPD detectives canvassed the neighborhood, interviewed subway workers, and reviewed security footage. Carol's apartment showed no signs of struggle. Her bed was made, dishes were washed, and her uniform for the next day was laid out. Her purse and ID were missing, but her suitcases remained. There was no activity on her credit cards or bank account after her disappearance. It was like she just evaporated between her apartment and the hospital. Detective Frank Moretti, one of the original investigators, would say years later, people don't just vanish in a city with millions of eyes. But somehow Carol had. The early investigation hit one dead end after another. The security cameras at the subway station only covered the entrance, not the platform. The morning rush hour meant dozens of potential witnesses, but no one remembered anything unusual. A canine unit tracked her scent from the station to the street, suggesting she might have exited rather than boarded a train. But the trail went cold at a busy intersection. As days turned into weeks, theories began to emerge. Some believed Carol had been targeted by a serial predator prowling the subway system. Others suggested she had run away, though this seemed implausible given her stable life and future plans. A few even speculated about a patient's family member with a grudge, as Carol had recently been involved in a difficult end-of-life care situation. Throughout it all, Harold Brennan was a constant presence. He allowed police to search the building multiple times. He distributed flyers with Carol's photo. He even established a small reward fund for information. In newspaper photos from the time, He can be seen standing somberly at community vigils. Just another concerned citizen hoping for answers. The community response was overwhelming. Fellow nurses organized search parties. Local businesses displayed Carol's photo. Even hardened New Yorkers accustomed to the city's dangers were unsettled by the seemingly random disappearance of a young woman just going to work. "It could have been any of us," said Diane Rodriguez, a neighbor who lived 2 floors below Carol. "That's what made it so scary. Carol did everything right. She wasn't out late. She wasn't in a dangerous area. She was just going to work in the morning like thousands of other people." By December 1993, the active investigation was winding down. Carol's case remained open, but detectives were pulled to other, fresher crimes. Her family returned to Buffalo, carrying the unbearable weight of not knowing. Her apartment was eventually cleared out, her possessions packed into boxes that her parents couldn't bear to unpack but couldn't throw away. For all practical purposes, Carol Williams had become a ghost, present only in memories, photographs, and a thin NYPD file that would gather dust for nearly 3 decades. Like, subscribe, and comment. The search for Carol Williams began as a priority case. A young nurse vanishing during her morning commute represented the kind of random crime that strikes fear into the heart of a city. But as weeks turned to months, the urgent manhunt gradually transformed into a methodical, then intermittent, and finally dormant investigation. The timeline of the case as slow descent into obscurity reveals how even the most dedicated detectives can be overwhelmed by the relentless flow of new crimes in a city that never sleeps. October 15th to 21st, 1993, the first week saw intense activity. Detectives Frank Moretti and Susan Ramirez led the investigation, working nearly around the clock. They interviewed 37 residents of Carol's apartment building, 14 hospital coworkers, and dozens of subway employees and regular commuters. Flyers with Carol's photo plastered the neighborhood. Local news covered the story nightly, October 22nd to 31st. Police divers searched the East River based on an anonymous tip that proved fruitless. A witness came forward claiming to have seen Carol arguing with an unidentified man near the subway entrance, but later recanted when shown surveillance footage that contradicted their timeline. November 1993, the investigation remained active but began showing signs of strain. Detective Ramirez was reassigned to a triple homicide in Washington Heights. The case was transferred to the Missing Persons Squad, where Detective Moretti continued working it alongside an increasing caseload of other disappearances. December 1993, the final press conference was held on December 7th. By then, Carol's story had been relegated to brief mentions on the evening news. The holiday season brought a new wave of crimes requiring immediate attention. January 1994. The case file was officially classified as cold, but remained open. Monthly check-ins with Carol's family became quarterly, then annual. "We never stopped looking," Detective Moretti insisted in a 2020 interview. "But we ran out of places to look. Every lead we chased evaporated. It was like trying to grab smoke." The evidence collected in those early months was substantial, but frustratingly inconclusive. Carol's apartment yielded few clues. Fingerprint analysis showed only her prints and those of Harold Brennan, which wasn't suspicious given his role as landlord. Her diary mentioned feeling uncomfortable in the building twice in September 1993, but provided no specific reasons. The security footage from the bodega showed Carol appearing normal. No signs of distress or being followed. The subway entrance camera captured her walking in alone. Phone records showed no unusual calls. Her last communication was a routine conversation with her mother the night before her disappearance. A single unidentified fingerprint was found on her bathroom window frame, but it yielded no matches in the system. Years later, this would prove crucial, but in 1993, it was just another dead end. Perhaps most revealing was what wasn't found. No body, no crime scene, no blood evidence, no witnesses to an abduction. Carol had simply stepped into the subway and vanished. By spring 1994, New York had moved on. A high-profile celebrity murder trial dominated headlines. Summer brought a wave of gang violence that stretched police resources thin. The tale of one missing nurse, however tragic, couldn't compete with fresh horrors. The media follows a predictable pattern with missing persons cases, explained journalism professor Alicia Martinez of NYU. Initial coverage is intense, especially if the victim fits certain demographics. But without new developments, interest inevitably wanes. It's not callousness, it's the nature of news cycles. For Carol's family, the fading public interest was agonizing. It's like she died twice, her mother told a Buffalo newspaper in 1995. First when she disappeared, and then when everyone forgot about her. Not everyone forgot, though. Detective Moretti kept a photo of Carol on his desk until his retirement in 2008. Every few years, he would pull the file, review the evidence, and make a few calls, more out of personal commitment than departmental directive. Harold Brennan remained in the neighborhood managing his building and gradually expanding his real estate holdings. He would occasionally ask about the case when running into former investigators, expressing appropriate concern while never drawing attention to himself. In 1998, the case was briefly revisited when another young woman disappeared from a nearby neighborhood, but investigators found no connection. In 2003, a prison informant claimed to have information about Carol, but was deemed not credible after questioning. By the 10th anniversary of her disappearance in 2003, only a small paragraph appeared in the local Queens newspaper. The 20th anniversary in 2013 passed without mention. For all practical purposes, the case of Carol Williams had become a ghost story, a cautionary tale shared among young nurses at Presbyterian Hospital, a fading memory for longtime Astoria residents, and an open wound for a family still waiting for answers. What would you have done if you were investigating this case? What clue do you think detectives might have overlooked? Drop your theories in the comments below. Sometimes a fresh perspective can shed new light on even the coldest cases. The not knowing is what destroys you, said Margaret Williams, Carol's mother, in a rare interview given in 2015. Death brings grief, but at least there's closure. This limbo, it's like being trapped in a nightmare you can't wake up from. For the Williams family, Carol's disappearance wasn't a case that went cold. It was a wound that never healed. While the official investigation slowed to a crawl and public interest faded, her family's search never stopped. Michael Williams, Carol's brother, took a leave of absence from his accounting job in the months following her disappearance. He rented a small apartment in Queens and walked the streets daily, showing Carol's photo to anyone who would look. He retraced her possible routes to work, visited homeless shelters, and checked hospital records across the 5 boroughs. I kept thinking I'd turn a corner and there she'd be, Michael said. Maybe with amnesia, maybe just lost somehow. The human mind creates these impossible scenarios because the alternative is too painful to accept. Their father, Robert Williams, a Vietnam veteran who friends described as stoic to a fault, channeled his grief into action. He established a small foundation in Carol's name that offered scholarships to nursing students and, more importantly, funded annual advertising campaigns to keep her case in the public eye. Each October, billboards with Carol's face would appear in Queens, asking the simple question, "Do you know what happened to Carol?" Margaret Williams took a different approach. She became deeply involved with support groups for families of missing persons, finding solace in the company of others who understood her unique pain. She lobbied state legislators for better resources for cold cases and advocated for the creation of specialized cold case units in police departments. Carol's case wasn't just abandoned by police, Margaret clarified. They had limits, budgets, manpower, other cases, but we didn't have those limits. We could keep searching. Because we had to, the family marked Carol's birthday each year with a small gathering. They aged, Carol did not. In photos taken at these memorials, you can see the toll of time. Margaret's hair whitening, Robert's shoulders stooping, Michael's face lining with age. while Carol remained forever 28 in the framed photograph they brought to each ceremony. If you find this story moving, please hit the like button. It helps more people see Carol's story and reminds us all that behind every cold case statistic is a family still waiting for answers. And speaking of statistics, let's pause for a moment to consider the scale of this issue in America. According to the National Missing and Unidentified Persons (NamUs), more than 600,000 people go missing in the United States every year. While most are found alive, thousands remain missing for extended periods. As of 2023, there are approximately 13,000 active unidentified remains cases in the NamUs database. Even more staggering, by conservative estimates, there are over 250,000 unsolved homicides in America dating back to the 1960s. That's 250,000 families like the Williams suspended in that terrible state of not knowing. The years brought cruel milestones for the Williams family. In 2008, Robert Williams passed away from heart failure. He died of a broken heart, Margaret would later say. 15 years of not knowing what happened to his daughter wore him down day by day. In 2013, on the 20th anniversary of Carol's disappearance, the Williams family made a difficult decision. They held a memorial service, not a funeral. Margaret insisted on the distinction to honor Carol's life. They didn't accept her death, but they acknowledged the need to celebrate who she had been. People said it would help us move on, Michael explained. But you don't move on from something like this, you just learn to carry it differently. Margaret Williams kept her phone number unchanged for 30 years despite multiple moves, in case she tries to call home. She explained simply, every night before bed she checked that the ringer was on. Some wounds don't heal with time, some questions demand answers. And some families refuse to let the world forget, even when the world seems determined to move on. Like, subscribe, and comment. January 2020, the NYPD Cold Case Squad office buzzed with the usual mix of determination and resignation. Detectives worked methodically through decades-old files, knowing most would remain unsolved. In this environment, Detective Olivia Ramirez found herself drawn to a particular box of evidence, the Carol Williams disappearance. It wasn't assigned to me, Ramirez would later explain. I just kept coming back to it during lunch breaks. Something about her face in those old photos. Something about how complete the disappearance was. No body, no witnesses, no closure. It felt solvable somehow. Detective Ramirez, a 15-year veteran with a reputation for tenacity, had no connection to the original investigation. Born in the Bronx to Dominican immigrants, she was just a child when Carol vanished. But after reading through the dusty case files, she formally requested permission to reopen the investigation. Cold cases aren't just about justice, Ramirez said. They're about answering questions that have haunted families for decades. The Williams family deserved those answers. The landscape of forensic science had transformed dramatically since 1993. What was once impossible had become routine. DNA technology had advanced from basic matching to touch DNA that could identify a perpetrator from microscopic skin cells left on an object. Digital forensics could now recover data from damaged devices and analyze video footage with sophisticated algorithms to spot details human eyes might miss. Genetic genealogy had emerged as a powerful tool, allowing investigators to identify suspects through family DNA matches in public databases. Most crucially for Carol's case, fingerprint analysis had evolved from requiring 12 to 16 matching points for identification to utilizing AI systems capable of finding matches with partial prints previously deemed unusable. Ramirez began by cataloging all physical evidence still in storage. Carol's hairbrush, the clothes from her apartment, fingerprints lifted from her bathroom window, and security footage transferred from deteriorating VHS tapes to digital formats. The unidentified fingerprint from Carol's bathroom window became Ramirez's focus in 1993. It hadn't matched anyone in the system, but the print had been preserved, and Ramirez submitted it to the FBI's next-generation identification system, which contained millions more profiles than existed 3 decades earlier. Simultaneously, she ordered advanced DNA analysis on items from Carol's apartment, particularly focusing on areas that might reveal an unauthorized presence. Doorknobs, window frames, personal items that should have only contained Carol's DNA. Technology gives us new tools, Ramirez explained. But detective work still comes down to asking the right questions. Who had access to Carol's apartment? Who knew her routine? Who remained in the picture all these years without raising suspicion? The investigation hit a turning point in March 2021. The enhanced fingerprint analysis returned a match, not a direct identification, but a familial connection to prints belonging to someone arrested for voyeurism in 2017, Timothy Brennan, Harold Brennan's nephew. This connection, while not conclusive, shifted Ramirez's focus squarely to Harold Brennan, who had remained in the neighborhood all these years, still managing several properties. Sometimes the most obvious suspect is hiding in plain sight, Ramirez noted. Brennan had legitimate reasons to be in Carol's apartment as her landlord. He had knowledge of her routine. He had access. And most importantly, he had inserted himself into the investigation from the beginning. With Brennan now the primary person of interest, Ramirez began building a case methodically. She reviewed all security footage from 1993, now enhanced with modern technology. On a grainy tape showing the subway entrance, previously unnoticed by original investigators, a figure resembling Brennan could be seen lingering near the station 40 minutes before Carol arrived. The decisive breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Harold Brennan's own meticulous record-keeping. While executing a search warrant on his office in April 2022, investigators discovered a hidden storage room containing boxes organized by address. The box labeled with Carol's former apartment number contained items that could only have belonged to her, a name tag from the hospital, a distinctive bracelet her mother had identified as missing after her disappearance, and a small diary. Some killers keep trophies, Ramirez explained. But Brennan kept files organized, labeled, preserved, almost like evidence he was collecting against himself. Further searches revealed similar boxes for other female tenants who had lived in Brennan's buildings over the decades. -1 women who had reported strange occurrences in their apartments. 3 who had moved suddenly after uncomfortable encounters with their landlord. And 2 who had disappeared but whose cases had never been connected to Brennan. The cold case had suddenly become red hot. Have you ever followed a cold case that was eventually solved? What was it about that case that captured your attention? Let us know in the comments. The true crime community often keeps these stories alive long after official investigations have stalled. Harold Brennan, aged 67 at the time of his arrest in 2022, had spent nearly 4 decades building his reputation in Astoria, Queens. To neighbors, tenants, and business associates, he was the quintessential self-made success story. A hard-working property owner who had started with a single building in the 1980s and gradually expanded to own 7 residential properties throughout Queens. He was the kind of landlord who remembered your kids' names, said former tenant Maria Vasquez. He'd fix things promptly, sometimes show up with Christmas cookies in December. Never gave anyone a reason to be suspicious. Brennan served on the local Business Improvement District Board, donated regularly to community causes, and was known for keeping his properties well-maintained, a rarity in a city infamous for neglectful landlords. He remained unmarried, explaining to inquiring neighbors that he had married his work after a heartbreak in his youth. The church-going, civic-minded Brennan presented himself as somewhat old-fashioned, favoring sweater vests, driving the same sensible sedan for 15 years, and often lamenting how the neighborhood had changed. This carefully constructed persona disarmed potential suspicion and created an image of harmless reliability. Looking back, it was the perfect cover, Detective Ramirez explained. Who suspects the friendly middle-aged landlord who waves to you every morning? His ordinariness was his camouflage. Behind this facade lay a calculated predator who had developed a system for targeting vulnerable women living alone. As investigators would discover, Brennan's method followed a consistent pattern. First, he carefully selected his tenants, showing a preference for single women between 25 to 35 who worked long or irregular hours in helping professions. Nurses, teachers, social workers, these careers often meant predictable schedules and extended periods away from home. Second, he installed what he called security upgrades in their apartments, modifications that in reality facilitated his surveillance. Hidden cameras disguised as smoke detectors, locks that could be bypassed with master keys he alone possessed. In some units, investigators found evidence of small peepholes drilled through walls concealed behind picture frames on the adjacent side. Third, he meticulously documented his tenants' routines, keeping detailed logs of their comings and goings, their visitors, even their delivery orders. The journals recovered from his home contained information so personal could only have been obtained through extensive privacy violations. It was methodical. Forensic psychologist Dr. Rebecca Sloan commented after reviewing the evidence, "This wasn't impulsive behavior." Brennan created an environment where he could exercise control and voyeurism with minimal risk of detection. For most victims, the invasion remained undetected. Uncomfortable feelings they couldn't quite explain, items seemingly moved in their absence. The sensation of being watched that they dismissed as urban paranoia. Some moved out early, citing vague reasons. Others stayed, unaware of the predator holding their spare keys. What transformed Brennan from voyeur to something far more dangerous remains unclear. Investigators believe Carol Williams may have begun noticing inconsistencies or perhaps confronted him directly. Her diary-esque cryptic mention of feeling uncomfortable in her building suggests she might have sensed something was wrong. The discovery of Brennan's extensive stalking network sent shock waves through the community. Investigators identified at least 17 women who had been subjects of his surveillance between 1985 and 2022, meticulously categorized in his records. Among them were 5 women who had filed police reports about strange occurrences in their apartments, reports that had never been connected because they spanned different precincts and decades. Most disturbing was the evidence linking Brennan to other disappearances. Lucia Mendez, a kindergarten teacher who vanished in 1999, and Aisha Johnson, a social worker last seen in 2008. Both had been Brennan's tenants, both cases had gone cold, and both women's personal effects were found in Brennan's carefully labeled storage boxes. If you're finding this case as disturbing as I do, please leave a comment with your thoughts. What warning signs do you think might have been missed over the years? Your insights could help others recognize dangerous situations before they escalate. Now, here's something investigators found particularly unnerving about Brennan's evidence collection. Unlike many criminals who keep trophies as reminders of their crimes, Brennan organized his victims' belongings like an archivist. Each item was cleaned, cataloged, and dated. He kept maintenance logs, noting when he entered apartments, what he observed, and any adjustments he made to his surveillance equipment. This wasn't just a predator taking souvenirs. This was a man documenting his crimes with the detachment of a researcher. The storage room containing these records had a specific air filtration system to prevent decay, temperature controls to preserve the materials, and backup power in case of outages. In my 20 years of law enforcement, I've never seen anything like it, said NYPD Captain James Morris. It wasn't a collection motivated by emotion or compulsion. It was more like evidence preservation, almost as if he wanted to create a perfect record of his crimes. What makes this case even more disturbing is how Brennan used his status as a helpful community member to insert himself into the perfect disguise. Within days of the news breaking, the NYPD established a dedicated hotline for former Brennan tenants. The response was overwhelming. 23 women came forward with accounts of unexplained intrusions, missing personal items, and uncomfortable encounters with their former landlord. More disturbingly, detectives in neighboring counties began reviewing unsolved disappearances with potential connections to Brennan. Property records showed he had owned buildings in for New York boroughs and parts of New Jersey, significantly expanding the geographical scope of the investigation. "We believe Carol Williams wasn't his first victim, nor his last," stated Manhattan District Attorney Alan Vasquez at a press conference. "We're dealing with a predator who operated undetected for decades. The scale of his crimes may never be fully known." For the Williams family, the arrest brought complex emotions. The confirmation of Carol's death ended any lingering hope, however faint, that she might still be alive. But the answers they had sought for 30 years had finally arrived. "We knew," Michael Williams said, his voice breaking during a brief statement to the press. "Deep down, we knew she wasn't coming back. But knowing what happened, knowing who was responsible, there's power in that knowledge, even with all its horror." Margaret Williams, now 81, spoke only briefly after the arrest. "My daughter can rest now, and so can I." As of September 2023, Harold Brennan awaits trial on multiple charges, including first-degree murder for Carol Williams, Lucia Mendez, and Aisha Johnson. Prosecutors have built what they describe as an overwhelming case based on his own meticulous records, forensic evidence, and the testimony of surviving victims of his surveillance. Brennan has pleaded not guilty, though his defense team has reportedly explored potential mental health defenses. Legal experts predict the trial, scheduled for early 2024, will likely result in a conviction that ensures Brennan spends the remainder of his life behind bars. For the Williams family, the identification of Carol's killer has brought a measure of peace that had eluded them for 3 decades. They attended the preliminary hearings, finally able to look at the man who had stolen so much from them. "We can visit a grave now," Michael Williams explained. "Not Carol's, unfortunately, but at least a place to put flowers, where we know what happened to her. That's more than we've had for 30 years. The case has prompted several police departments nationwide to review their cold case protocols, with particular attention to seemingly unconnected disappearances with geographical proximity. The NYPD has established a new task force specifically focused on landlord-tenant relationships that might have enabled similar predatory behavior. If you found this story compelling, please share this video with others who appreciate true crime analysis. Every share helps ensure that victims like Carol aren't forgotten and that their stories continue to educate and inform. What time is it where you're watching? Drop the time and your location in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see how this community spans the globe, united by a desire for justice and resolution in cases that might otherwise fade from memory. Like, subscribe, and comment. The investigations of the very crimes he committed. After Carol disappeared, he not only participated in search efforts, but provided police with helpful information that subtly misdirected their focus. He suggested they look into a former maintenance worker he had fired, Detective Ramirez explained. He mentioned a suspicious van he claimed to have seen near the building that week. He even pointed investigators toward Carol's ex-boyfriend from Buffalo, implying their breakup might not have been as amicable as others believed. Each piece of information was calculated to waste police resources and established Brennan as a cooperative citizen concerned about his missing tenant. Similar patterns emerged in the investigations of Lucia Mendez and Aisha Johnson. In each case, Brennan had provided tips that led nowhere. As investigators dug deeper into Brennan's past, they discovered that his property ownership had begun with an inheritance from an aunt in 1983, the same year a young woman went missing from the building he first acquired. That case, never solved, now appears likely to be his first victim. "We believe he's been active for nearly 40 years, said Detective Ramirez. And he might have continued indefinitely if forensic technology hadn't finally caught up with him. Like, subscribe, and comment." May 17, 2022, 6:23 a.m. A dozen unmarked police vehicles surrounded Harold Brennan's modest 2-story home in Astoria. Tactical officers took positions at exits while Detective Ramirez and her team approached the front door. The timing was deliberate, early morning, the same time of day Carol Williams had disappeared nearly 3 decades earlier. Brennan answered in a bathrobe, seemingly confused by the commotion. The search warrant in Ramirez's hand changed his expression from bewilderment to resignation in an instant. He knew, Ramirez recalled, the moment he saw me holding that paper, something changed in his eyes. Not panic or anger, acceptance, like he'd been waiting for this day to come. The arrest was methodical and undramatic. Brennan offered no resistance as he was handcuffed and led to a waiting vehicle. His only words, according to the arresting officers, were, "I suppose you found my files." Inside his home, investigators discovered what they would later describe as a command center of surveillance. One bedroom had been converted into a monitoring station with screens showing live feeds from his various properties. Filing cabinets contained decades of journals documenting the movements of dozens of female tenants. A separate room accessible through a hidden door in his closet contained shelves of storage boxes, each labeled with an address and name. The box marked Williams, C. 1993, contained the definitive evidence linking him to Carol's disappearance, her hospital ID badge, her keys, a lock of her hair preserved in plastic, and most damning of all, a detailed journal describing how he had followed her into the subway station that October morning, confronted her about snooping in the building's maintenance areas, and ultimately killed her in a utility tunnel when she threatened to report him to authorities. The journal even detailed how he had disposed of her remains at a construction site in New Jersey, a location now covered by a shopping mall, complicating recovery efforts that continue to this day. News of Brennan's arrest exploded through the community like a shockwave. Longtime neighbors struggled to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the monster described in police reports. Former tenants reviewed their interactions with him, suddenly recognizing warning signs they had dismissed. "He always seemed to know when I'd be home," said Rebecca Torres, who had rented from Brennan in 2015. "I'd find things moved slightly in my apartment, but convinced myself I was being paranoid. Now, I can't stop thinking about what might have happened if I'd confronted him." The arrest made national headlines, with many outlets focusing on how someone could hide such darkness for so long in plain sight. Psychological experts discussed the profile of long-term predators who integrate themselves into communities specifically to access victims and avoid suspicion. These individuals are masters of appearance, explained forensic psychologist Dr. Eller Whitford. They study normal behavior and mimic it perfectly. They understand that being forgettably pleasant is